No one expected the youngest Windsor to halt a room of seasoned royals, aides and advisors with a single sentence. But Princess Charlotte's words didn't just command silence, they froze the palace. This wasn't a tantrum, nor a child's whim. It was a thunderbolt. Something so piercing, so raw, that not even Camilla, William or Charles could look each other in the eye. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. It began as an unusually tense morning inside Windsor's most private chamber, where only a select few royal aides and senior figures had been summoned to discuss an undisclosed matter during King Charles' absence. The agenda had been deliberately vague. Terms like interpersonal dynamics and line management discretion floated in the air like smoke. And yet, none of the aides present were prepared for who would walk in just after the doors closed. Princess Charlotte, dressed plainly, not in ceremony or sparkle, but with the stillness of someone who had seen more than she was ever meant to. She took her seat beside no one, between no adults, firmly placing herself in the heart of the storm. What shocked the room wasn't just her arrival, but the fact that no one stopped her. Whispers later suggested that her name had never appeared on any official attendee list. Some claimed it was a security lapse. Others believed she was invited by someone higher than the king himself. But the truth, which only emerged later, was more unsettling. Charlotte had come of her own will. That alone would have caused discomfort. But it wasn't until she opened her mouth, waited for silence, and then delivered 5 quiet but thunderous words that the entire palace dynamic tilted irreversibly. "Is this still my family?" It was as though time stopped. Pens hung mid-air, aides frozen in postures of disbelief, and even Camilla's usually impassive expression cracked into something momentarily unguarded. Some dropped their notes, while others looked immediately to William for an explanation, only to find his face drained of all colour. Catherine, too, did not move. It was not a question to be answered. It was a judgment, a challenge. A crack down the middle of the room that no one dared step over. Within seconds, some of Camilla's loyal aides scrambled to regain control, pivoting to protocol, trying to drown the moment in bureaucracy and scripts. But it was too late. The words had already been spoken. And in a palace where everything is controlled, where silence and legacy are carved into stone, a single question from a young girl had done what no royal directive had managed in decades. She exposed something deeper than policy. She exposed betrayal. What did she know? Who had she been listening to? And why now? But to understand why Charlotte's words held such chilling weight, we must unravel the tension boiling beneath the palace floors for weeks. While the media showcased royal smiles and garden walks, a quieter, more dangerous game brewed behind palace walls. Aides assigned to monitor Charlotte underestimated her, but the young royal had eyes that missed nothing and a memory like a ledger. What began as whispers in corners soon became a silent battle of will and influence. Long before the council chamber fell silent from Charlotte's haunting question, a cold current had been pulsing through the palace. Behind closed doors, away from cameras and royal photographers, internal documents had circulated bearing coded annotations. One such file, unearthed only after Queen Elizabeth's passing, revealed that the late monarch had penned private letters identifying Charlotte as the keenest observer of them all. Her Majesty had sensed something others had missed entirely. Charlotte's gift was not just presence, it was perception. And within weeks of Elizabeth's death, that perception made her a target. Senior aides, most of them discreet loyalists to Camilla's camp, began placing subtle limitations on the child's movements. They called it supervision, they called it structure. But buried inside the royal administrative system, it had a name: observation protocol. Charlotte's outings were reshuffled. Invitations once promised were quietly revoked. Tutors were swapped without notice. The books she had once devoured in the library now appeared redacted, certain family histories missing pages altogether. Instructions were whispered, and staff in her immediate circle began to speak in coded language. But what those aides failed to grasp was that Charlotte had long trained herself to listen in silence, to see the smallest cracks in the grand illusion of unity. One aide mistakenly told her the same story twice, once ending in triumph, the other in scandal. That's when Charlotte knew. She was being managed, she was being watched, and someone, somewhere feared what she might learn. Her instincts flared during a rainy afternoon in the East Wing nursery, where her trusted nanny, an old friend of Catherine's, pulled her aside, eyes strained with worry. "Some people," she whispered, "don't want you knowing everything. Keep your questions safe." It was a simple warning, but to Charlotte it sounded like the toll of a bell. That evening, she refused to attend her scheduled etiquette review. No tantrum, no protest, just silence. And from that silence began a deliberate campaign of quiet defiance. She started memorizing details, conversations, inconsistencies, names that repeated in whispers. Every encounter now had meaning, every shift in behavior carefully filed in the archives of her mind. What none of the aides anticipated was the one silent alliance already forming between Charlotte and Princess Anne. The Princess Royal, often overlooked and underestimated herself, had seen enough of palace politics to recognize when a young royal was being boxed in. She never instructed Charlotte outright, but in moments stolen between ceremonies and carriage rides, she would offer quiet counsel how to read the room, when to stay still, when to strike. There were no formal lessons, but there was understanding, and slowly Charlotte was transforming from an observant child to a quiet threat, walking among adults who had no idea they were already exposed. Yet it wasn't Charlotte's cunning that startled the aides, it was the moment she spoke aloud, what no one dared admit. 5 words. That's all it took. In a room filled with people sworn to discretion, loyalty, and royal silence, Princess Charlotte simply asked, "Is this still my family?" And just like that, every mask fell. Behind the poise and diplomacy, the fractures of a divided monarchy cracked wide open. The room, once humming with scripted conversation and tightly choreographed tension, descended into a vacuum of disbelief. No one moved, not even the senior aides whose very job was to control chaos. Anonymous accounts that later surfaced described the moment with chilling clarity. Camilla's face turned visibly pale, her fingers frozen mid-gesture, her composure briefly shattered. William, mid-sentence, went completely still, his words severed mid-thought as if they no longer had permission to continue. Catherine said nothing, but a quiet exhale escaped her lips, one of dread, not relief. And yet, the only one who remained entirely composed was Charlotte, who sat still, her expression unreadable, her tone absent of accusation. It wasn't rebellion, it wasn't dramatics. It was clarity, unforgiving and unfiltered. That simple question didn't come from nowhere. It was the culmination of months of Charlotte being edged out of moments that once felt warm and instinctive. She had begun to notice it in small ways, events she was once included in now held without her, corridors that once welcomed her suddenly closed with new security protocols, aides speaking in clipped tones around her, always careful, always filtered. At first she thought it was coincidence. But then the letters began disappearing. Notes she wrote for her mother, expressions of frustration or confusion, never seemed to reach Catherine. When she asked about them, the answers were vague, lost in transition, delayed by scheduling, or simply ignored altogether. That was when she started copying everything, keeping duplicates, hiding originals. What she uncovered by her own quiet persistence was a system of subtle redirection meant to keep her compliant and distant. Behind the throne, it became evident that factions were growing bolder. There were whispered plans to sideline the younger royals from emotionally sensitive duties. Documents circulated suggesting that visibility should be earned, not inherited. And someone, somewhere, was testing how far Charlotte's silence could be stretched, how much she would swallow, how long before the girl known for her quiet brilliance would finally break the royal rule of unspoken things. But Charlotte didn't break. She calculated. She waited. She chose that room, that moment, and those 5 words, and by doing so, she stripped every adult in that space of their armor. Across the table, Lady Louise blinked slowly, clearly stunned, but then gave the faintest nod, a gesture of solidarity, quiet but deliberate. For she too knew what it meant to be watched, filtered, and boxed in. What Charlotte did in that instant was more than speak her truth. She shattered the illusion that everything was under control. No denial, no memo, no carefully crafted press release could undo what had been said, because Charlotte hadn't asked for answers. She had revealed a wound. But what prompted such a haunting question from someone so young? The answer lies in a growing storm Charlotte had quietly endured alone, behind an unlocked door in the lesser-known wing of the Royal Library. Charlotte stumbled upon a document that should never have been in her hands. Hidden between genealogy volumes, sealed pages revealed an internal dossier marked Obsidian Appendix, Classification Level Windsor 4th. What she read changed her forever. It was supposed to be a simple assignment, researching the House of Windsor's 19th century diplomatic treaties for a school project. She had been granted limited access to the royal archives, a routine gesture for a young royal being educated within the system. But one misfiled book led her fingers to brush against something harder than parchment, an envelope deliberately wedged into the hollow spine of a dusty volume. Her eyes scanned the bold stamp, internal only eyes of the crown. Curiosity clashed with caution, but Charlotte's instinct had already decided. Inside was a dossier, cryptic and unnerving. She didn't recognize the names, but she recognized the implications. Obsidian Appendix was not history, it was contingency, a secret playbook written for a monarchy that feared collapse more than scandal. Page after redacted page laid out protocols designed to maintain royal continuity in the event of mass public disillusionment. Terms like deauthorization clauses, narrative relocation, and emergency persona realignment danced across the text. At first, it felt abstract, but then she found it the clause that stole her breath. It was buried under obscure language, but the meaning was clear. Should the public lose confidence in a senior female royal figure, a controlled reassignment of symbolic maternal representation would occur. In blunt terms, if Catherine ever became a liability through illness, controversy, or fabricated failure, another figure would quietly be elevated to maintain the image of stability. And that substitute, that pacifier, had a code name, Lionheart-3, her own, Charlotte. The full weight of it didn't register at first. She sat frozen, rereading the lines. She wasn't being groomed for leadership. She was being reserved as an emotional tool, a safeguard to absorb backlash. And the person being silenced in this equation wasn't just her mother, it was her. She had never consented to this role, never been briefed, and yet there it was, her name, attached to a narrative she had never been allowed to write. She didn't cry. She didn't tell anyone. Instead, she folded the paper back, with the precision of someone who knew the act of discovery was itself dangerous. She returned it exactly as she had found it. But when she walked back through the library corridors, her world no longer looked the same. Over the next few weeks, palace staff noticed changes. Charlotte asked fewer questions, but her silence became louder. She watched people closer, made fewer movements, became deliberate in her routines. William assumed it was part of growing up. Catherine sensed something deeper. Only Anne, in a passing glance during a shared breakfast, caught the flicker of pain behind Charlotte's composed gaze. Whatever innocence had remained was gone. In its place stood an awakening, one not born of tragedy but of manipulation. And while the adults bickered behind closed doors, Charlotte began preparing her own quiet rebellion, armed only with truth, memory, and an unstoppable sense of right. In a forgotten corridor near the Queen Mother's rose chambers, Charlotte confided in the one royal she knew would never betray her, Lady Louise. What she revealed about the palace's attempts to silence her sent shivers down Louise's spine. And what Louise told her in return shifted everything. Charlotte didn't come to her in panic or tears. She came with purpose, calm, measured, and holding a truth too heavy for her young shoulders. She described in hushed tones how she had overheard two senior aides in the southeast drawing room discussing her exclusion from future ceremonial appearances. Not just postponed, erased. The phrases they used weren't accidental. Keep her behind the line. Let Catherine carry the image without distraction. It wasn't about protocol or privacy, it was about control. They were designing a future where Charlotte would be present only in form, not in voice. Her growing intuition, her awareness of power dynamics, had made her inconvenient, and they feared what she might expose if she ever stood too close to the light. Louise listened without interruption, her jaw tightening as each sentence painted a picture she knew all too well. She remembered her own years in the shadows, moments when her name was struck from guest lists, when invitations were lost, and how she was told time and again that discretion was nobility, that obedience was the crown's most valuable virtue. But Charlotte's story felt different. It wasn't just marginalization, it was a calculated effort to fracture the bond between her and her mother. If Catherine became a symbol of strength and Charlotte was quietly removed from her side, it would send a message unseen to the public, but clear within palace walls, that the legacy of women in power would always be monitored, measured, and managed. The two girls, one nearly a woman, the other far wiser than her years, made a vow that day. No more assumptions, no more silence. Every whisper would be remembered, every contradiction documented. They began keeping their own record, a silent archive of overheard remarks, unexpected restrictions, and the small betrayals that slipped between royal smiles. Charlotte began journaling in secret, developing her own coded system for names, places, and moments of suspicion. Louise, having grown up learning the language of discretion, helped her conceal these entries, hiding them in the vault behind the chapel's north alcove, protected by a private phrase only they knew. But what solidified their pact was not strategy, it was a moment of emotional truth. As they stood at the edge of the corridor where portraits of Elizabeth's younger years hung unguarded, Louise turned to Charlotte and said what no one else had dared to offer. "Your voice isn't small, it's just waiting to roar." And in that instant, Charlotte wasn't just a young royal fighting for space, she became a future force, silently sharpening her mind for the battle ahead. What had started as fear was transforming into clarity. She didn't need permission to matter, she only needed the moment. And when that roar came, it wouldn't just shake aides, it would draw the attention of the highest ranks in the monarchy. When word of Charlotte's outburst reached King Charles, his reaction wasn't anger, it was dread. In a private directive issued from Balmoral, Charles ordered an internal audit of all aides connected to the young royal advisory wing. The question haunting him, what exactly had Charlotte heard? Behind the gates of royal tradition, where protocol masks panic and silence is often the loudest language, the king's response to his granddaughter's defiant question was anything but ceremonial. He issued no public comment, made no mention of it during scheduled appearances, and continued to wear the expression of routine duty. But inside the halls of Balmoral, where private orders carry more weight than public decrees, a sweeping and highly confidential operation was already underway. Charles did not ask for explanations, he demanded evidence. Every aide who had ever engaged in restricted briefings near Charlotte's proximity was placed under quiet review. Memos were recalled, communication logs were extracted from internal systems, private rooms were rescanned for unauthorized meetings. The monarchy was not bracing for scandal, it was bracing for exposure. What terrified Charles wasn't just the content of what Charlotte might have seen, it was the possibility that she understood it, that the very mechanisms designed to outmaneuver and redirect young royals had failed to blind her. Under his instruction, a select group of senior advisors were told to begin cross-checking every recorded internal conversation that mentioned both Charlotte and Catherine in proximity to succession discussions. Within 48 hours, at least 3 aides were reassigned, no farewell notes, no transition ceremonies, just gone. One name was quietly blacklisted from future royal postings. The other 2 were shuffled into external Commonwealth offices under the pretense of diplomatic expansion. But those close to the process whispered that the reshuffle was not strategic, it was survival. In the shadows of this internal reckoning, Protocol Clarion was invoked, an emergency classification used only in situations involving direct threats or instability connected to royal minors. Historically used in security matters, this time it was repurposed to justify unmonitored questioning of those embedded in Charlotte's daily schedule. Some claimed it was precautionary, others believed it was retaliation. Regardless, it confirmed one unspoken truth: the palace no longer trusted its own walls. What Charles feared most was the emergence of a document long buried in the obsidian appendix, a clause drafted during the later years of Queen Elizabeth's IGN that hypothetically allowed for Catherine's constitutional presence to be minimized in times of national instability. Though never enacted, whispers about its existence persisted in royal circles, and if Charlotte had stumbled across it, if she had seen her mother's name framed as expendable, then the entire family structure was at risk of fracturing from within. The king's silence was not apathy. It was an attempt to freeze the moment before it spiraled. Yet in his effort to control the fallout, he made one critical misstep. He chose not to tell Catherine. Not in full. Not yet. He believed shielding her was wise, that she'd be too emotional, too reactive. But in doing so, he underestimated something even more dangerous than truth. The storm building behind Charlotte. Silence. But even as the palace scrambled to contain the damage, it was already too late. The world would soon learn what Charlotte had seen. Catherine's hands trembled as she read her daughter's private journal. William sat in stunned silence, eyes locked on one particular sentence. "They told me Mummy doesn't need to know." The full truth was now out, and it was far worse than they imagined. The journal came to them quietly, without fanfare or explanation, delivered not by a courier, nor by a member of their official staff, but by Lady Louise, eyes heavy with understanding, words few but deliberate. She had found it hidden behind the royal chapel alcove just as planned, protected by a private code she and Charlotte had once created in secret. Catherine hadn't even known the journal existed, but the weight of it in her hands told her everything. Page after page, Charlotte had chronicled the moments she had been monitored, redirected and silenced. Names were included. Quotes, word for word. Entries detailed the exact times aides intercepted her letters, denied her access to public events, and even attempted to control her proximity to Catherine at key royal gatherings. These weren't the thoughts of a child. These were the entries of someone who had been systematically reduced into silence and who had fought back with truth. William's fury boiled just beneath the surface. He stood frozen, hands balled into fists, teeth clenched in disbelief. The idea that royal bureaucracy had penetrated their parenting, that orders could be given to filter communication between a mother and her daughter, was unforgivable. Catherine's anguish was quieter, more surgical. Each word she read carved deeper into her, not just as a mother but as a woman who had spent years mastering the balance between public duty and private love. And now that balance had been sabotaged. Not by the press, not by the people, but by those within the palace walls who claimed to serve the crown. Her immediate instinct wasn't sorrow, it was resolve. She rose, journal in hand, and demanded a private audience with Charles. No media, no aides, just the truth behind locked doors. What was said in that confrontation remains unconfirmed, but sources close to the inner circle said Charles was visibly shaken. Catherine didn't raise her voice. She didn't plead. She presented the journal, read aloud the line that had broken her, and asked one question: how long had this been allowed to go on? There was no shouting, no scene. But the next morning, 2 aides disappeared from their posts without explanation. Charles gave no statement, but those who saw him that day said he looked older than ever before. Meanwhile, Charlotte said nothing. She watched the shift quietly, knowing the burden no longer sat on her small shoulders. Her silence had become her strength. Her words, hidden for months in those pages, had finally reached the right hands. And Catherine, now burning with protective fury, moved swiftly. Without announcement, or public gesture, she issued a quiet reshuffling of her personal inner circle. People who had long stood in the shadows now found themselves replaced, their authority dissolved without warning. She didn't need headlines to make a statement. Her silence was its own thunder. But before Catherine could reclaim control, it would be Charlotte once again who stunned the world with her next move. In front of global cameras at the Royal Youth Forum, Charlotte veered off script and spoke directly to the world. Sometimes, even in palaces, the truth is hidden behind gold doors. But I believe children can see what adults pretend not to. The room erupted. The palace froze again. The Royal Youth Forum had been planned as a showcase of harmony, designed to spotlight the monarchy's support for the next generation. Charlotte had been offered the chance to deliver a short, pre-approved statement to close the event, a symbolic gesture more than anything else. Her handlers had vetted every line. The teleprompter was preloaded. Nothing, they believed, could go off course. But Charlotte had other plans. With her mother's journaled pain still burning in her memory, and her own voice sharpened by months of silencing, she stood before a global audience and rewrote her role in real time. The script was discarded within seconds. What followed was not polished or rehearsed. It was raw truth. She spoke not of opportunity, but of omission. She didn't reference names, but her words drew blood. She spoke of invisible hands that decide which voices are heard and which are buried, of the quiet pain that grows when one is told to observe but not speak. She told the world, integrity doesn't come from age, it comes from courage. And sometimes, courage begins with asking why you're being asked to disappear. The message was unmistakable. It was an indictment, a declaration. And though no aide tried to cut her off, many shifted uncomfortably in their seats as the weight of her words reached their mark. Within minutes, the world reacted. News outlets from New York to Nairobi ran headlines with her quote. Commentators were divided, some called it rebellious, others revolutionary. But no one denied its power. Social media exploded. Hashtags like #SharlotteUnfiltered, #TheYoungLioness, and #LetHerSpeak trended globally. Young people saw her as a symbol of resistance within royalty. Mothers, educators, and activists posted tributes. Even critics of the monarchy found themselves moved. In that brief, unscripted moment, Charlotte had done what generations of royal handlers feared most. She had humanized the crown while exposing its cracks. Back in the palace, the response was immediate. Camilla, who had been scheduled to deliver the following address, cancelled her appearance without explanation. Her absence said more than words could. Behind closed doors, senior aides scrambled to issue statements of support without appearing to contradict the princess. Meanwhile, William and Catherine, standing just behind the curtain, made no attempt to shield their emotions. They emerged not as protectors, but as witnesses. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Their presence beside their daughter spoke volumes. Bar Cha. Otte didn't smile as she exited the stage. She didn't bask in applause. She walked with the same calm defiance that had led her through every closed door and every whispered corridor. But unlike before, she no longer walked alone. The world had heard her now. And the palace, no matter how tightly it gripped tradition, could no longer deny the storm rising from within its own bloodline. But Charlotte's bravery didn't just ignite public conversation, it triggered a historic decision that would mark a new era for the monarchy. For the first time in modern history, a child was granted a formal acknowledgement by the Royal Legacy Council, not for lineage, but for moral clarity. With 3 aides resigning and 2 reassigned, the council voted unanimously to establish Charlotte as a symbolic royal observer, a title never used before. The fallout from Charlotte's public speech had sent ripples through the monarchy, but no one expected what came next. Within days, the pressure on the palace was no longer internal, it was national. Demands for accountability grew louder. Questions from Parliament were posed with unusual boldness. Commentators, once deferential, now dissected royal silence with surgical precision. And then, without warning, 3 of the most senior aides connected to the young royal advisory wing submitted their resignations. No interviews, no explanations, just letters of withdrawal and vanishing public profiles. 2 more aides were quietly reassigned to distant diplomatic posts. The internal rot had been exposed, and there would be no cover-up this time. The monarchy had been forced to confront itself. In response, the Royal Legacy Council, an ancient but rarely activated institution that advises on long-term stability, was summoned for an emergency session. What emerged from that closed-door meeting was unprecedented. The council invoked a rarely used constitutional clause, allowing them to recognize individuals who serve the moral preservation of the crown outside traditional lines of power. The decision was unanimous. Princess Charlotte, not as heir, not as pawn, but as truth-bearer, would be granted the honorary title of symbolic royal observer. It carried no immediate legislative weight, but symbolically, it shattered centuries of silence. It granted her unrestricted access to the royal historical archives, legacy materials, and council briefings tied to the institution's moral trajectory, not for control, but for awareness, for insight, for the assurance that no one, no matter how young, would be sidelined for speaking the truth again. When the decision was made public, William released a personal statement. But this time, he didn't write as a prince. He wrote as a father. "She is more than our daughter," he said through tears. "She's a voice of tomorrow and the reason we must protect what's good within the crown, not what's convenient." Catherine said nothing publicly, but internally she moved with swift and final authority. Every suppression clause embedded in Charlotte's records was ordered destroyed. Every tracking protocol was deactivated. Catherine didn't call it reform, she called it restoration. She made it clear to every advisor that transparency was no longer optional. And then came Charlotte's final entry in her once-hidden journal. 7 words, written without bitterness, without triumph, but with a clarity that shook those who read it. "It's not over, but it's beginning. No anger, no revenge, just purpose." For a girl once expected to smile, wave, and remain silent, she had become the pulse of a changing monarchy. She had exposed the limits of power and rewritten the meaning of legacy not with rebellion, but with truth. As the monarchy faces its most defining decade yet, one thing is now certain: Princess Charlotte is no longer just watching the crown, she's reshaping it. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.